The ship is set to drill 190 holes up to 60 meters deep for over 60 offshore wind turbines. Gaillard is worried that the construction work on the seabed will destroy the local aquaculture.
Here in Sombreye, we mostly fish for scallops. If this is no longer possible because the scallops are inedible, many fishermen will go bankrupt. That is scary. I just bought a new fishing boat last year.
The generous supplies of seafood and fish here are partly due to the fact that for decades the local fishermen have agreed to limit the amounts they catch. They fish sustainably. That makes it all the more bitter for fishermen like Julien Tréorel that some of them are already feeling the negative effects of the drilling work.
The lobsters hide under stones and big boulders, in places where there is sand and rocks. But recently, a big machine moved the blocks and put them in a different place. The lobsters that have been there for years have fled. The impact on my business will be dramatic.
On its website, however, the Spanish operator praises the project as a means to provide environmentally friendly energy. The company has the support of the French government, which ignores the criticism from local fishermen. The government has even issued the operators with a number of special permits that override species protection regulations. The transition to renewables is underway, regardless of whether or not citizens protest. The French Wind Energy Association has made a simple calculation.
Wind turbines produce renewable and CO2 neutral energy. France wants to be carbon neutral within 30 years. That is not possible without wind power.
We're back at the tranquil Sombreye Bay with its unspoiled nature. Locals cannot believe the plan to build wind turbines here of all places. The residents fiercely oppose the construction project.
This is supposed to be sustainable, but in reality it's destroying nature. They need to do something else that is truly ecological.
In Erquy, even environmentalists oppose the wind turbines. They say the location is completely unsuitable for a wind park. And Catherine Pujol says the 20-meter-tall turbines will ruin the unspoiled coastline.
It's scandalous to ruin such a beautiful ocean panorama and turn it into an industrial landscape. This bay is under environmental protection. That includes the coast and the sea all the way out there.
Catherine Pujol is certain the French government would never have considered ruining Paris or its surrounding by installing wind turbines there. In fact, the nearest wind park is about 1.5 hours by car from the French capital. Most people in rural areas just aren't convinced by the argument that there just isn't enough wind in Paris.
Many French people have the feeling the plans are drawn up by technocrats and bureaucrats in Paris who do not know the situation on the ground. They feel this disadvantages people who do not live in Paris.
The ship has only drilled very few holes in Sombreye Bay over the past weeks. The project is far behind schedule. To make matters worse, oil has contaminated the bay during the operation. The drill simply can't get through the hard rocks below.
When you see how slowly this project is progressing, it is clear that it will be some time until the wind park is completed. We have granite and dolerite rock. Brittany's nature simply rejects these offshore wind turbines.
The local fishermen simply cannot believe that the project is still going ahead. And they're certain that ultimately they will win the fight against the wind turbines.
Anne Frank was one of 140,000 Jews who lived in the Netherlands during the Nazi era. And like the vast majority of them, she was deported and murdered. Her diaries documenting that time have become famous the world over. Still, it took nearly 80 years for the victims to be memorialized in the Netherlands. It's a touching tribute that lays bare the scope of the Nazis' crimes against humanity.
102,000 names. There is one brick for each Dutch victim of the Holocaust. The monument is a labyrinth of names. Survivors fought for over 15 years for their loved ones to be commemorated. For a site of remembrance in Amsterdam's former Jewish quarter.
It took so long, but now it is here. And it is here for eternity. It is so important that everybody continues to be reminded of what happened. When you see all these bricks, which represent people, the extent of the crime becomes visible.
Her husband, Ruud Sanders, lost over 60 relatives. The walls are up to 7 meters high and 370 meters long. Behind each name lies a terrible fate.
I wore the yellow star for more than half of the war. Nobody talked about it. Nobody.
Her father was Jewish. Her mother was a Catholic. She managed to have the J for Jew in her teenage daughter's papers removed and saved her life.
We all suffered so much.
Jacqueline's best friend at school was Anne Frank. At the time, she had already gone into hiding. Today, she remains one of the most famous victims of the Holocaust.
She wrote me 2 farewell letters in her diary. After the war, her father brought me the book. I was able to read them. It was very nice. She wrote that she often thought of me, and I always thought of her.
The key theme here is commemoration of all the Jews and Sinti and Roma who never returned. This is a symbolic grave site. It's also what Myrna Tugendhaft wanted for her mother.
We lived up there on the 1st floor.
She and her husband, Matti, often visit her childhood home in Rotterdam. Her mother died in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp shortly before the end of the war. The 83-year-old had a brass plaque installed in the ground to commemorate her.
She was buried in a mass grave in Bergen-Belsen. This is the only memorial to her.
In 1943, the entire family was deported. Myrna was just 5 years old, but the memories remain with her to this day.
It was nighttime. I was already in bed. A German soldier stormed in. He shouted, "Get up, come with me at once."
The house was cordoned off. The whole family was first taken to the Westerbork internment camp and then to Bergen-Belsen. Myrna spent 2 years in concentration camps.
I shared a bed with my mother. My father was in the men's barrack. We had to line up for roll call every day. They always started counting over and over again because they lost track. It lasted for hours. We stood in line in all kinds of weather, in the cold, in the rain, the wind. It was terrible.
There was barely any food. Her mother died of starvation.
Shortly before the end of the war, we were loaded into cattle trucks. Destination unknown. There was a lot of ammunition stored in the middle of the train. The idea was to blow us up with the train. We were parked on the track for a week, crammed together without water, without food, without sanitary facilities. There was one wagon full of children. Many did not survive.
The train was liberated by the US Army. The new Holocaust monument in Amsterdam remembers the names of all those who died. Each brick is a gravestone. Architect Daniel Liebeskind wanted the anonymous masses to be remembered as individuals, as people who had a life, a past, an age.
It's a book of names that has been erased from the history of Netherlands and has come back to this site. Memory is not just a footnote, it's the ground of our existence, because without it we don't really know what our future is. So it's important to remember, and that's why the characters of the letters, the Hebrew letters which I used, really speak about in remembrance.
Until now, we only had the brass plaque. Today, I can see many of my relatives here. We never had a gravesite for them. Now we have something that reminds us.
There are 1,000 bricks without names. They commemorate the many nameless victims and serve as a warning.
Now to a ghost town on Estonia's border with Russia. During the Cold War, the town of Sileme on the Baltic coast didn't officially exist. It belonged to the Soviet Union and was literally taken off the map during that time. Well, after Estonia became an independent country in 1991, its existence was denied no more. Our reporter traveled to the mysterious place, which is still waking up from its slumber.
When Nadezhda Artomanova strolls through her hometown of Sileme with her boyfriend, they still run across relics of the Soviet era. Factory ruins emblazoned with the Russian word for peace. But in these factories, the activities carried out in secret for decades were anything but peaceful.
My parents grew up in Russia and were sent to work not far from here. At that time, Sileme was a closed town. You weren't allowed to simply enter it.
That was because the small town on the Baltic was a center of Soviet nuclear production. Officially, it did not even exist. It wasn't even marked on Soviet-era maps. Today, it belongs to Estonia and the European Union. But most of its residents were born in Russia. Mainly elderly people. Mikhail Kafonov still takes pride in the secret mining of uranium oxide in the region. This chapter from his past can be seen at the local history museum. Kafonov was employed at a uranium enrichment plant. If we hadn't started here under those tough conditions, we never would have had any uranium or the atom bomb. And what would that have meant for the fate of the Soviet Union? America already had the atom bomb. Opinions like that make Nadezhda cringe. The image of a forbidden town still looms over Sileme, and that is why most of its young people are leaving. The 30-year-old has also thought about moving to Estonia's capital, Tallinn.
I grew up in the post-Soviet era, so the old prejudices about Sileme are a burden. I wish it were a town of the present. But we need more attention and investments.
Uranium is no longer mined here, but the vast heaps of oil shale used as an energy source litter the region. But now Sileme's future could look like this. Nadezhda is studying computer programming at a newly founded information technology school. A number of Estonian startup millionaires made it possible. It's one way for the town to shake off its dark past.
There will be a lot of change happening around here because we are moving away from the oil shale mining. So there's a need for new kind of innovation, new industries to come into Ida-Virumaa. So why not IT?
The Estonian government also wants to abandon the old industries and invest in the new. The promenade leading to the sea has been thoroughly revamped, but discontent among the ethnic Russians living here runs high. The past is still cast in a dim light.
Things used to be better here than in the towns in Russia. Supplies of goods were better. There were better clothes than anywhere else, and of course, the people had jobs.
The Russian border lies just over 20 kilometers away, but few of Nadezhda's generation feel drawn to the land of their ancestors.
I've been to Russia a few times, but I couldn't imagine living there. The mentality here in Estonia is different. And so, I've never even thought about it.
Veteran Mikhail Kafonov can't understand that. Recently, he received a medal from Moscow for his work in uranium production. He admits the town was closed off to outsiders at the time, But he never had a problem with that. If anyone asked, we said we worked in oil shale processing. It was prohibited to talk about our real work. Nobody ever held that against us later on. But Nadezhda's looking ahead. Once she'd begun studying to be a programmer, she gave up her plans to move elsewhere.
I'd like to travel a little and get to know other cities, maybe even go abroad. But now I know I'll definitely be coming back. I want to use the experiences I gather elsewhere for my own town.
Thanks to young residents like Nadezhda Artamanova, the once closed town of Sileme could leave its dark past behind it once and for all.
Where do cattle go when they've been put out to pasture? Believe it or not, many don't end up living out their days grazing under the sun. Extreme stress and breeding can lead to exhaustion, sending them to an early death in the slaughterhouse. But one farm on Germany's North Sea coast is allowing the animals to age gracefully.
It's early morning down at the farm.
Rosa! Frederick! Time to eat.
Karen Muck is not a farmer. She runs a retirement home for animals. Friedrich escaped from a livestock trailer. And Rosa is from a fattening facility where she languished gravely ill. Karen and her partner, Jan Gerdes, mainly tend to cows who would normally have ended up at the slaughterhouse after years as agricultural livestock. At Hofbuttenland, the animals can spend their twilight years in peace.
We've prepared fodder for the old folks from the nursing ward, so to speak. They are suffering from arthrosis and can no longer keep up with the herd.
Some local farmers think the retirement home for animals is a crazy idea. But their project now has so many supporters that it can take good care of the 38 cattle from the donations. Marika needs a lot of loving care. She stood in a stable for 12 years. The technical term is tethering. During that time, she produced over 100,000 litres of milk. Karen says it is cruel that the dairy industry often treats animals like machines. She thinks consumers don't know enough.
There are so many fairy tales. For example, that cows always produce milk. Few people know that cows need to give birth first. In industrial farming, they are artificially inseminated. And then after they give birth, the calf is taken away so that we can drink her milk.
Jan Gerdes had taken over his parents' farm. First, he carried out organic farming, but eventually he decided to abandon farming for good. Some farmers have criticized his move, saying while they are hard at work, he is out collecting donations. But he disagrees.
Very few farmers could manage without EU agricultural subsidies. To me,